Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We have a range of speakers today, and we're a little bit late started, so I'm just going to jump straight in. And Anna, do you mind kicking us off and introducing yourself, please?
Sure, yeah, of course. So my name is Anna Markova. I work at the Trade Union Congress. I'm the policy officer for climate and industry. Big thanks to Matt for inviting me. Shall I just start my presentation? Is that all right? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, let me try and share my screen, and we'll see how many more technical difficulties we will encounter. Here we go. There it is. Can you see? Can you see a presentation? Is that coming up?
We can.
Is it coming up as a presentation? Right, am I in the correct view?
Yeah, it's big enough.
Yeah. All right, there we go.
Perfect.
Wonderful. All right, so my brief today is to chat to you about carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and the different scopes of emissions and how companies address them and tackle them. So to start off with, I mean, I'm sure nobody particularly needs a primer in climate science or what the UN says or anything like that, but just as a reminder that cutting carbon emissions really can't be put off. It really is a very urgent task for any country, any company. The remaining carbon budget, i.e. the amount of carbon, the amount of greenhouse gases that we can put into the atmosphere and still have a safe, livable climate for the future, is equivalent to about 8 or 9 years at the current rate of global emissions. That's quite an alarming thing, but this is, this is the IPCC, this is the official UN climate science body saying this. So really when we're thinking about and when we're looking at how companies or finance institutions or public institutions plan to address their carbon emissions, the thing to bear in mind really is this timeline for the outcome that the UN has agreed to aim for. Really, net zero needs to be reached quite a lot faster than most governments, most businesses are planning for, and so this is really the science to measure those plans up against. And for some businesses it will be easier to plan to go net zero emissions faster. For others it'll be harder, but this is really the yardstick against which we should be measuring every plan. So now on to emission scopes. So every company, every organization, its operations lead to some amount of greenhouse gas emissions, whether that's through transport, goods and people being transported in planes or fossil fuel powered cars or buses or trucks. It emits greenhouse gases through heating our buildings, cooling our buildings where that's needed, through producing electricity, although in the power sector, our power sector is currently doing a pretty good job of progressively decarbonizing. And there's also kind of manufacturing emissions and other things. Normally, when companies or organizations report on their emissions, they divide them into 3 scopes, and that's really the gist of the presentation today, is the difference between these 3 scopes. So Scope 1 are emissions that are directly from the operations of a company, and I'll go into what that means in a minute. But imagine a factory that has a chemical process that emits greenhouse gases, or imagine a company running petrol or diesel powered cars. Those are the direct emissions. Scope 2 are the emissions specifically related to the energy the organization uses. So that's heat and that's power. And scope 3 is indirect emissions related to the value chain. And you'll see I've taken this graphic from someone else, but that used to say supply chain. I've corrected it to value chain, and I will explain why in a minute. So scope 1, the own emissions, the very direct emissions of an organization. That's generating electricity or heat or steam where that's done on site. So, for example, imagine a gas boiler or a combined heat and power plant that's directly operated by the organization. It's manufacturing or processing of chemicals, materials. It's waste processing. It's transporting materials, products, waste, and people. I don't know why this doesn't include it, but so if the company has a fleet that it transports people and things back and forth, then it's the emissions of that fleet. And then it's also effectively gas leaks. So if you're a big bakery and you have an industrial fridge and that leaks, that leaks the coolant gases, there's always a tiny bit of leaks, and that also contributes to the scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 is very, very simple. It's the emissions made by power companies in the process of producing the power that the organization uses. So let's say I run that bakery, and the bakery uses lots of electricity to run its ovens, and it's the emissions produced by power plants that we're buying the electricity from. So if there's in the UK there's currently a power mix between renewables, gas power, nuclear power, and some smaller generation of by other things. So that gas power primarily will be generating emissions, and that's the scope 2 emissions of my bakery or whatever other business. And finally, scope 3 is the value chain. So let's say, again, going with the bakery again, it'll be I bought my flour and my sugar, and that flour and sugar came to me in a big truck using diesel. It might be the emissions in the transportation there. It might be the emissions in the processing and production of those goods. But it's also that is up the value chain, but it's also the emissions down the value chain, i.e. bakery is not a good example here, but let's say I make vehicles. It's not a very high, compared to other manufacturing sectors. Automotive is a bit less energy intensive, a bit less carbon intensive than some, but if I make cars, those cars go on the road and emit carbon, then that is also carbon that I'm indirectly responsible for. So it's those emissions, and then it's also emissions in the process of waste disposal. So again, I run my bakery. I hand over my trash at the end of the day to a waste disposal company. If that trash goes to landfill, that also is responsible for some emissions, and that also needs to be factored into what I'm responsible for. So that roughly is the difference. And I think where it gets really interesting is when we start thinking about, well, what's the most, what scope of emissions is the largest for a company? What scope of emissions is the one that they have the most control over? What's hardest to address? Those are the really interesting questions when you start thinking about sort of planning for decarbonisation. I'm going to try a little bit of audience participation. Hopefully the tech will allow. Can anyone tell me, what do you think is the largest chunk of emissions? What scope of emissions do you think is the largest chunk of emissions for a tech company?
2.
Anyone know? 2, power. That's a really reasonable guess. Depends on your tech company, but that's a really reasonable guess, because if you run data centers, you'll probably be burning up quite a lot of power, and you're not manufacturing anything, or I mean, depending on what company you are, but that's a really, really good guess. What about for the NHS?
3. Waste.
Waste, yeah, waste is a big one. Incineration is a big one. It'll also be those kind of the production of the various goods that the NHS uses, equipment and things like that. Yeah. What about for an oil company?
1.
We'll see that in a bit. What about for a bank?
3. Yeah.
So that's a really, really good set of guesses. I'll show you some examples. So for a tech company, I actually found the reporting for Apple, which is not very, if I took Google, then 2 would be exactly the correct response, just because of the enormous server power that Google requires. Google's actually not very transparent about their emissions. I couldn't find them very quickly. For Apple, the 76% of Apple's carbon footprint, as it reports it, is in product manufacturing, and they actually report it within Scope 3 because Apple doesn't own the factories that your iPhones and your iPads are made in. So interestingly, even though it's manufacturing emissions, they report them within Scope 3. But you're absolutely correct. For a lot of tech companies, if you're just dealing with software and you're just dealing with service, Scope 2 is likely to be pretty large, and a lot of them will already have plans in place or might have already switched to fully renewable power for that. So that is something that they can act on fairly swiftly with the way that the power sector is going.
That's also what Apple must be doing to report 0% Scope 2. They must be using renewable energy.
Yeah, precisely. For the NHS, Scope 3 is correct. So the supply chain for medicines and equipment and other supply chain makes up most of the emissions, and only 10% is the energy used in the buildings. There are some really hard to abate things in medical. So anesthetic gases and metered dose inhalers. That's a really small chunk, but that's actually a really, really hard one to abate because it's direct emissions from very specific, very potent greenhouse gases that are made that are used in medical settings. Oil and gas. Scope 3 is absolutely huge. So we're used to thinking of oil and gas as emitting a lot of carbon itself, and there's a lot of when you read sort of sectoral net zero plans, they pretty much always focus primarily on the Scope 1 or the Scope 3, but upstream, so the kind of the supply chain, the oil and gas services side of things. But obviously, if you're producing fossil fuels, and those fossil fuels are then burnt unabated, so in cars, gas in power plants that don't have CCS installed in them, and so on, then that's absolutely massive. That is the bulk of global emissions. Well, not the bulk, but like a really significant chunk of global emissions is the responsibility of not the responsibility, the Scope 3 of oil and gas companies. In finance, there's a recent report. Some of you might have seen this. A report done by a consultancy called South Pole and Rouse Research for Greenpeace and WWF recently, that basically suggests that the UK financial sector collectively, the projects and companies financed together make up 805 million tons of annual CO2 equivalent emissions, and that's larger. That's almost twice what the UK itself emits domestically. And if it were a country, it would be the 9th largest emissions in the world. And now, again, this is Scope 3. This is not things that financial institutions themselves directly control, but that is a rough calculation that that these researchers have done of the theoretical kind of scope of potential influence of the UK financial sector, and that is I haven't been able to find a good sectoral comparison between scopes 1, 2, and 3, but I'm pretty sure that this scope 3 defined in this way is way larger than any of the direct and power emissions for that sector, and I think that the other thing to say about this is that this is not a problem, but also an opportunity, because it's a potential sphere of influence, right? Like the choices made by financial institutions about how and who they finance and how they engage with those companies then have potential influence over the company's emissions and can influence them pretty significantly. I wanted to mention beyond scope 3, there are other ways that institutions and companies kind of influence carbon that's emitted or carbon emitting activity. This is a famous image from a protest art intervention at the Tate Museum about 15 years ago, when BP was a headline sponsor of the gallery, and the argument that the kind of movement against oil sponsorship of the arts was making was that the arts institutions, by taking that sponsorship, by allowing themselves to be branded with the BP logo, were enabling the kind of political and financial deals that then enable the oil company to continue extracting oil and polluting. There's a lot of debate to be had about kind of how these influences work, but I just wanted to give that as an example of kind of of the ways that institutions might be linked into and enable carbon emitting activity, even if it's not anything that you can ever report on a kind of audited report on your carbon emissions. So that's worth having a think about, that kind of cultural and political side of things, and what are the influences that the organization has. I wanted to close with some questions for reflection and discussion. It'd be really interesting to hear what everyone has to say. So my first question is, are you talking to your employer about climate action planning in general? Secondly, what emissions does your employer report on? Do these include the scope 3, and do these include the finance projects or financed institutions, and how do they do that? Thirdly, does your employer have a plan for aligning their own operations and services with science-based climate targets or with just transition principles? And if you can push for a change in your employer's climate plans, then what are the most impactful changes you can target? Can you target their lending practices? Can you target something more kind of directly to do with the states? And what would make the largest impact if you were able to target it? Those are my questions, and I just want to close with a reminder that obviously as trade unionists, it's not just about the carbon emissions. We have this framework of just transition that I think is really crucial to how we look at any organization's engagement with the decarbonisation process. For workers, it's just as important that science-based climate targets are met, and that the people whose jobs are directly affected or whose livelihoods are directly affected by the changes we need to make to tackle climate change, that those people don't lose their livelihoods, that those people are fully involved in leading the change, that there is worker voice and job quality and a properly funded plan to a net zero business model in any company. So even though I wasn't focusing on that today, that is absolutely the key kind of yardstick for us in measuring up how any company or any organization is engaging with this process. So thanks very much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Anna. Really interesting stuff, and some scary stuff there as well. And I think it's really interesting, some of the graphics that you had around the reporting of this. And I'm guessing it's very different across the board. People reporting it in different ways to perhaps make it look better than it is. Is that fair to say in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when the kind of classic example is if an oil and gas company says that they can become net zero in their operations by 2050 or whatever it is, what that masks, of course, is that if they don't have a plan for the use of those products that's gonna be compatible with a net zero world, then that is not exactly a viable pathway.
Sure, thank you. Is there any other questions that we had for Anna on that one?
Nothing's come in yet, and some of the questions we've had previously are probably when all speakers are together. Okay, it would be unfair to put them all on there for a perfect answer when there's 4 people to deal with them.
Well, I think
Something's coming.
perhaps there is some crossover between what you've been talking about and moving into, I think, our next speaker. But
One has just come in. So thank you, Mike. Anna, any thoughts on the argument about maintaining large amounts of shares in the speech marks dirty companies? Any thoughts about maintaining large amount of shares in dirty companies to then give the investors a voice to lobby, push the company on these matters?
So I think I'm not an investment specialist. I'm not a pension specialist. It's hard for me to kind of say what a viable strategy is, and what isn't. I think what's the question that's important to ask ourselves is how big is that influence that we're able to have, right? Like, are we able to, with the lobbying power that we have, with the coalitions that we have, are we genuinely able to turn the direction, the business model of that company around? And I think my personal sense of that, and again, I'm not a specialist, I'm not a mandated spokesperson on investment and pensions and things like that. It will differ from, my understanding is it'll differ from company to company to what extent you can or can't genuinely sort of force a company to align to climate targets.
Sure, and I guess one of the points you made, the size of the finance industry, it makes you think, actually, even though it's not directly, just the size of the industry in this country means that this sector has a huge kind of, I guess, part to play going forward in that. So thank you. And yeah, as I said, I mean, we kind of obviously moving from the TUC to, I guess, some more unions that are getting involved. And we have in the room here with us in Swindon, Matt Stanley and Caroline Taylor, Matt from the Nationwide Group, and Caroline from Community Union, just to talk a bit more about what our unions specifically are doing there. So can I hand over to you, Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I'm just going to try and also share some slides. Hopefully that will.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Not only did my slides load up, I was the first actually to access the Wi-Fi. I don't mean to brag on that, but I'm just going to talk a few minutes about NGSU. So that's the Nationwide Group Staff Union, and I guess our sort of journey over the last 12 months with regards to the green agenda. So I suppose first of all about NGSU. So we're an affiliated TUC affiliated trade union. We're also affiliated to Alliance of Finance and Unions 21 as well. We're a staff union, so the vast majority of members are employees of Nationwide Building Society, and we have had a 50-year relationship with the society. We've got around 12,500 members, and we aren't a political union, so we don't have any political affiliations either. So I guess our journey around climate change sort of started at we have a biannual conference, and the 2021 conference was obviously within in and around the pandemic, so it was a virtual conference, and the the makeup of that largely was discussing and submitting kind of policy statements. So the following policy statement, which was one that came forward at our conference, and kind of started this sort of path in terms of how we could get involved in the green agenda. So I won't read that out, but we can kind of share the slides afterwards. But broadly speaking, this was, well, it was supported by the membership, and broadly speaking, it was calling for NGSU to play a bigger part within the green agenda, acknowledging that it was, you know, the biggest threat to society as a whole that we face at the moment. Now, Nationwide does a lot of good work around the green agenda and around green issues, but I think where our role was as a union is ensuring that the good work that they put in terms of outward facing and the campaigns that they support and the member products they put out with green, you know, with the green agenda is also reflected in terms of how employees work, and that was kind of where we were kind of coming in there, really, just to ensure that, as I like to say, Nationwide is green on the inside as they appear to be on the outside. So we formed what we called the Green Advisory Group. I've just noticed my first mistake on the slide. The Green Advisory Group, and that was basically a number of people who just showed interest in and around that time, and we got together and established a group of there was 8 of us at the time to see what we could do around Nationwide to support the policy statement that was passed. And I think it's been touched on a little bit already, but we come from it from the frame that every job needs to be a green job. And whilst looking at this externally, you know, financial services doesn't necessarily appear to be a carbon intensive industry, you know, when you look at things like, you know, manufacturing industry maybe, or offshore oil and things like that. But as Anna's already alluded to, there is a lot we can do, and specifically within the Scope 3 emissions, we do play some part in quite a considerable amount of emissions. So the group set ourselves these sort of terms of references. So to work to ensure NGSU members are able to make environmentally friendly choices at work, to review and respond to nationwide processes and policies with climate change as a priority, build relationships with nationwide stakeholders and influence change for environmental benefits, to investigate external communications and produce policy and motion suggestions, to act as an environmental filter for all NGSU initiatives and existing ways of working, and to work to ensure Nationwide is an environmentally responsible and sustainable place to work. And finally, communicating the work of the group through a variety of engaging and accessible methods. So those were the kind of references, the terms of reference we set ourselves. And following that, we reached out to our membership and asked them, you know, over the first 12 months, what were their ideas, what was their feedback, and what were the kind of things they'd like us to focus on. And they came back at kind of 4 things, really, to look at increasing the electric vehicle charging points around the Nationwide estate, to reduce our use of single-use plastics, to improve recycling, and to look at sustainability within the cafes and restaurants that Nationwide offered as well. A big part of what we've been doing over the last 12 months is really around building, building foundations, building awareness, and trying to educate members on the wider issues of the environment to get more people engaged and more people involved. And a big part of that has been our webinars. So we hold bi-monthly webinars with environmental organisations basically on very broad topics. So they'll come and do a presentation, 30-minute presentation or so, and then we'll have a 20-30-minute question and answers and a debate around some of the issues that we'll raise. And where we can, we see if there's anything that's raised within these that we can bring back and utilise in terms of, you know, union policy, and ensure that Nationwide got those things in place. So we've had the Marine Conservation Society that you'll hear from later, as well as the Woodland Trust, Renewables UK, who are a kind of umbrella organisation for the renewable industry. And on Thursday, we've got War on Want. And all of these, after the fact, are on our NGSU website for members who can't attend and to watch at a later date. We also publish a newsletter, so a quarterly newsletter, and this is, I suppose it looks at a variety of different things. So reports on what the group have been doing, as one of our terms of reference suggests. It also talks about any progression within Nationwide. So, for example, they've recently launched an electric car scheme through a salary sacrifice option. But we also talk about things external to Nationwide as well. So part of what I've been doing over this year is kind of liaising and networking with people out there in the green agenda already. So with Anna and the TUC Green Rep Network, but also places like the Greener Jobs Alliance as well. And we report on kind of their activities and how, how members can find out different things about them as well. The kind of things we've been working on over the last 12 months, previous 12 months, hybrid working policies. So obviously hybrid working has had many benefits, but a very tangible benefit of that has been the lack of emissions due to travel. Teams has enabled us to connect with people, all around the country fairly instantly. Employee benefits. So we now communicate with Nationwide's employee benefits team on an annual basis, and will feed back things that members, members are looking for from an environmental perspective. And the thing that was top of the wish list last year was around this electric car option. Recycling. So again, we sought suggestions back from our members about how we can improve the recycling offering, both within the branch network, but also in our administration centres. And also we've asked questions about how we can expand that. So a conversation we've got at the moment is around flexible plastics, the kind of things that are taken in at supermarkets and things, and whether that's something that could be offered in our larger administration centres. As I've already touched on, electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging points. Cafe and restaurant offering. So we put together some proposals around expanding vegan and vegetarian options, and the environmental benefits that they have for people who aren't vegan or vegetarian as well as the cutlery that are used, reusable coffee cups, providing the opportunity for people to wash up coffee in glasses and things along those lines. And also single-use plastics. And this was kind of something that sort of led us to where we are today in many ways. So one of the pieces of feedback we got is within our branch network, we have small blue tags that we use to seal cash boxes, and they are single use and they are thrown away within the ATMs. They are thrown away after every use. And actually, one of our Green Advisory Group members recently joined from Santander, and she shared that wasn't something that was used within Santander. And one of her colleagues in the same branch actually recently joined from NatWest, who said, well, that was also something they didn't use in NatWest. So us being able to provide that information to Nationwide to kind of say, well, from a competitor perspective, this piece of single-use plastic appears to be something that, we're a bit of an outlier on. We're not some, other organisations, similar organisations aren't using that. Really helped move that kind of conversation forward. And it's from there I kind of felt that having this wider discussion and using the membership of the Alliance of Finance, where hopefully we can kind of move forward and share ideas, share challenges, share best practices, that would help us kind of forward conversations, environmental conversations within all our organisations. So that's all I've got to say. I know, I believe him, our General Secretary, is on the call. I don't know whether there's anything you wanted to add at all, Tim.
I will need to unmute him. Hey, Tim, can you hear us now?
I can, yeah,
Yes,
yeah. Can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Yeah, no. Well, thanks ever so much, Matt. Yeah, I think you've covered all the key points. I mean, we realise it's a small contribution, but we felt a start was important, and as you can see, you know, we're trying to bring some influence to the debate, and influence what Nationwide are doing, and also, you know, looking at ourselves, and that's brought a new discipline to our own activity. I think one of the things that we can do that perhaps the employer is more reluctant to do is to publicise some of the events, and this was kind of quite apparent during COP26, where there were lots of rallies and events and things going on, which we were able to sort of bring to attention of members, and perhaps that's something that Nationwide, from its kind of corporate image, corporate considerations, probably didn't want to do. And so the newsletter that Matt showed there, you know, is a real opportunity to present information to members, you know, use our influence, speak to that audience, and again do our bit to raise awareness. So yeah, a small contribution, but you know, as unions, we have responsibility, don't we, to look at these bigger issues, and so small but important, I think.
So thank you. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And through doing this and just discussions with other colleagues as well, you know, you guys have a green advisory group. I know that green reps are starting to become a thing, but it's really not picking up as much traction as I felt that it would or should be having at the moment. And you know, hopefully, as you allude to, these kind of events, etc. If other colleagues from across the sector can look at them and say, okay, we should be doing something like that, then that would be a good, you know, a good outcome, I think, from that, this at least as well. So, and as I alluded to, I know Community have started a Green Rep programme, and it's something that we're pushing. Do you want to touch on that, Caroline?
Yeah, I haven't got slides today, because what I didn't want to do was sort of do too much death by PowerPoint. But just sort of to give you an idea, one of the ways we differ slightly from NGSU is Community are a general union. We've got lots of different sectors, which also gives us a good sort of handle on topics like sustainability in other areas, in terms of our steel sector and the just transition in green steel, to a lot of our light industries areas that are dealing with the sort of the changes in electrification and hydrogen, and the change to hydrogen boilers and heat pumps and sort of those sorts of topics. So what we have done because of that is we have set up an education forum for green reps and a green rep network. So those people in the different industries can come together to discuss what they're doing in their organisations and actually try and learn from each other as well as influence it. So the issue unions have got at the moment is green reps don't attract the same time off that general reps get. And what we try and do is push with the organisations that we've got good partnerships with to be able to say that these individuals should get the time off that they get with general reps, to be able to put forward ideas from other organisations and learn from them, but also be there to support and supplement what the organisations are doing in terms of their sustainability and their growth, and be able to get that message out there a bit further through to membership. One particular area that I've been sort of dealing with and talking to other individuals a lot with is the investments and the pensions aspect. I think one job we've got as unions is to actually get that message out there to people a bit more, get them talking about it. If they're more informed about what's going on and what companies are doing in terms of their investments and their scope emissions and that sort of thing, actually those individuals will make better choices with their personal investments in terms of their pension choices, and hopefully that will grow further, and pensions companies will then look for further and more sustainable options to be able to invest in, and that will grow and it'll almost sort of evolve itself rather than it being a sort of forced issue. And I think the main influence we've got as unions is that connection we've got to our members and that trusted voice to be able to say this is a topic we should all be talking about. It's not just the responsibility of the wider larger organisations who, yes, they've got the bigger responsibility, the bigger emissions, every individual can make a change into what they're doing, and can have that responsibility. So yeah, we do have that green reps course, and we've run it through as a first iteration, which has gone well. And it's just about keeping them talking and keeping them informed in areas that they might not necessarily see as a first thing.
I think sometimes as well, I mean, it's a specific issue which I think a lot of people are very passionate about. And so if you get that conversation started, you know, that can gain traction quite quickly, I think, within an organisation. And you're not just having that influence over the organisation, but perhaps even the customer base as well. And you know, almost everyone uses a bank or building society. So, you know, we're perfectly positioned, you'd say.
Yeah, and also the ability to influence a wider group of people, and then ultimately, hopefully, influence government to keep this as a top priority and keep them pushing to make things affordable and whatever choices they make. I mean, looking at the moment, at what the changes are going to be in terms of electric versus hydrogen, and how they're going to push that forward, and how much that's going to be a split between the two when that comes forward. And I know from doing some research that Labour are looking at sort of 60-40 split at the moment between electric and hydrogen, but is that going to be sustainable? What is the safer option? What are the risks associated? One of the organisations we've got partnership with is the AA, and the differences between vehicles that break down when they're electric and how many are written off because the cost of fixing them is so high. And actually, is that almost negating the process of actually going down an electric vehicle route, and what the next step will be? Will they go to hydrogen cars, and what the dangers are of that? So, and I think from an individual perspective, it's the cost to the individual and how that influences their choices when it comes to changing boilers, for example, and whether you go for a heat pump or whether you go for potentially hydrogen boilers, and how easy that's going to be to switch over from an individual perspective. I think there's a lot more intricacies involved with the different industries we've got, and as unions, it's that opportunity to influence and keep these topics at the height of the agenda, and with governments as well, to make sure it's sustainable but also affordable for our membership.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, I mean, I'll ask the question, Matt, in terms of when it comes to pay and benefits, how much, I guess, outside of the box have you started thinking about when, you know, rather than just saying we'll have 6%, please? I mean, is there a lot of conversations around different types of things? I don't know, for instance, a green loan. So if someone needs to change their boiler, you know, those sorts of things. Is that conversations that are happening?
So nationwide, and I think that's one of the things I was referring to when I was going green on the outside, green on the inside, because nationwide do have things such as, you know, there will be different rates for people who are looking for insulation on further borrowing, for example, and things along those lines. But internally, there isn't a huge amount on offer. I think that, you know, we did that piece of work for the member benefits kind of last year. And there was a few things that kind of came out. So the electric cars being one, but there was a lot of interest in things like it was all kind of salary sacrifice based stuff in around access to solar panels and such like. But I think that was some, you know, the green car was something that, or the green car scheme was something that I think Nationwide was keen to kind of do first and see how that kind of went, I suppose.
I think it's quite interesting in terms of when you're talking about the salary sacrifice in terms of solar panels, because I think with the shift of hybrid working, the influence of actually how many people are individually heating homes and how many people are using electricity individually that you wouldn't do if you were in a building and in the office. And I know there was I think it was Matt, you shared it with me, that investigation that happened in Germany about when is the best time to be working from home, when's the best time to be working in an office with regards to air conditioning and heating. And I think there's a lot more now to consider than there was when everybody was in one building and the scope was who was travelling to the office and the emissions in that respect, rather than all these hundreds of people sat individually in homes and their implications of heating and electricity.
And I think the point that Anna made with regards to the scopes was really interesting because again, you've seen things like, you know, travel and heating and things like that. Whilst an organisation is still producing those costs, it's now sat in scope 3 because the person's heating their own home rather than heating an office. So whilst a lot of and I was in Sainsbury's the other day, and they had this thing where they were saying, you know, by 2040 we'll be achieving net zero, and then underneath is for our own operations in scope 1 and scope 2. But so those kinds of movements, a lot of companies maybe aren't as clear as reporting as potentially they should be. And yeah, you're absolutely right. There was a report that kind of said from an environmental perspective, it's best to work at home throughout the summer months and to work in an office more towards the winter months, because it's cheaper to cool a resident than an administration building generally. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I know some of our organisations, as has been mentioned, the steel organisations, the amount of energy being used there, and that transition to trying to get closer to net zero. I'm not sure that will ever happen really, but the influence that we're trying to have over that by going, I think, a little bit more outside what we would normally do in terms of collective bargaining, because there is that we do have lobbying power to a certain degree. The NGSU, as you say, 10,000. That's 10,000 voices ultimately, which could be making that noise. So thank you. And was there anything else?
Just some stuff on chat. So Mike Calvert, I think I'm right, Royal London is also saying, yes, we have eco champs who run a variety of events, information sessions, and they have their own area on the internet and channels. I think one for Matt, if I may, sort of come to my head, which is, did you find it easy talking to the leaders and the execs within Nationwide? Was the door open?
Yeah, I think it was actually. They were really keen to talk, and I think acknowledge that from an employee perspective, that was something that was a gap that was missing. So that I think they very much saw the Green Advisory Group as an area they weren't necessarily doing as much as they could have at the moment. So yeah, it was very easy to kind of make contact with people. People are always really eager and keen to talk. I think, as with everything, in terms of there are very quick wins, and then there are more longer stage things. But yeah, very door was very much open and very keen to talk. Yeah.
Okay. And Caroline, I mean, getting time off rights, so those who are close to trade unions, you'll know that phraseology, which means that time to engage normally in employee relations matters. You're saying you've been able to get that for green reps, that employers are saying, yeah, this is valuable, we'll extend that entitlement.
Yeah, in some organisations, I think, especially those that haven't gone far enough themselves, that need that extra almost support to get the message across to their employees and what they're doing. And it's a case of being reasonable with it. And for those individuals who maybe aren't spending as much time on other union work, being able to sort of flex that time, I suppose, onto different issues. But for organisations where we've got good partnership, it makes sense to have those people involved and have them as part of whatever the organisation's sustainability agenda is. So far it's been good.
And the employees have responded to that. They've shown interest. They've moved it forward and stayed interested.
They have. It's the first. I mean, like I said, we've only had the first iteration of the Green Reps course. We've only got a small number of them at the moment, but those that have been doing it have been interested. And there seems to be a real, almost a trend of people that are involved tend to be the ones that are on the health and safety aspect of it, because it seems to be part of that role as well. So I think it's early days, but it's definitely moving in the right direction.
Okay, I'll hold the rest until
haven't done this sort of training. There's a way around it, Kevin, basically, which you don't tell the employer, which is it's just a rep, right? Don't put green in front of it. It's just a rep. Anna, can I come to you?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to flag that something that we found that we've heard from other unions is that the role of whether you call it a green rep or just transition rep or a climate rep will sometimes motivate people to step up to a formal role who would otherwise not really be that interested in taking on responsibility around kind of other types of industrial relations stuff. And I think that's I think that's an important thing for unions and for any employers organization to think about, is like, who can you motivate to take on these tasks, and is that a pathway to creating new younger leadership within your organization? I think that can be really, really valuable.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. And we've seen it with other types of reps as well, ULRs, for instance, and we've got equality and diversity reps. And I think sometimes it can empower people. If you give, if you know, you say you can have influence over this area, whether it's equality, diversity, whether it's green issues, then you're absolutely right. You kind of get a new breed, don't you, of reps who want to do that. So yes, thank you. All right, well, we're almost exactly at 12 o'clock, so we're going to take 5 minutes break, and we'll come back at 12:05. Thank you very much.
Discussions happening.
Okay, welcome back. We are delighted to be in Zurich's new office in Swindon today. Unity Place, is that correct?
That's great, yeah.
And guest of John Capel, Chief Sustainability Officer at Zurich Insurance. So, John, can I just pass over to you what sorts of things are going on in this world?
Sure. I do have a few slides, but maybe I'll start with a bit of a open rant and happy to take questions and be driven anywhere at all. So we are in Unity Place. It's a facility that we purpose built here in the centre of Swindon for a whole host of reasons, many of which are to do with sustainability in its broadest sense. So we've been in this building now, we just opened it a few weeks ago officially, but we've been in it since the back end of last year. In terms of early occupation, the facility was built from the ground up by us, and then ownership transferred, it was sold to the council and then leased back on a long-term lease. So not only was it sustainable in its construction, and I'll touch on some of that in a minute, it's also sustainable in its use. And it was also a big factor was the community sustainability outlook, because we have been in the centre of Swindon for a very, very long time. We are quite committed to the community in Swindon and the surrounding area, as are other big employers in the area. And it was quite important to us that the centre of Swindon had some kind of future. This particular plot of land had been vacant for a very long time, with the council having various iterations of development, kind of never really going anywhere. And so we decided to act as a catalyst for this particular development. The unfortunate downside of that is upon completion of this building, we're now surrounded by other works that are going on that we have in some way at least stimulated. But nevertheless, you know, it's helping the community in a part of the town that was really struggling for regeneration. So it's kind of extremely nice to play our part in local community sustainability agenda items as well. And that kind of brings me on to the definition of sustainability in Zurich. We have been talking quite a lot about climate, and clearly the climate response is part of the sustainability agenda within Zurich, but so is employment and employee sustainability. Career sustainability is quite a big factor of focus for me, my teams, and for the community more broadly within Zurich. And then we also have a huge focus on the sustainability journey for our customers. And we'll touch on that in possibly in a minute. But that really touches on the scope 3 responsibility that we as a financial service institution have. That was talked about at the outset of the meeting, and something that we take very seriously. So I'll give you a quick slide presentation, he says. You can see that? Excellent. I might just leave it on I'll make it big if it works. See if it works. If not, we'll carry on this view. But I'll give you a sense of the sustainability framework that we operate in Zurich. And this is something that's not unique to the UK, but it is the UK interpretation of it. So it operates within a global sustainability framework, or we operate within a global sustainability framework. There is not an equivalent of me in every country. There is somebody with a sustainability responsibility in every country. That's a bit mouthful. In every country, I think. Certainly, I meet several of them from the larger countries quite frequently, and there is a central group within the Zurich group that relatively modest that look at sustainability policy and more broadly. But then it's left to the country to grapple with the reality. So I was the COO of Zurich's UK business for the preceding 5 or so years, and then transferred into the sustainability. And it's the first time we've had an exec level sustainability individual within the company. I carry the senior manager responsibility, so I carry the regulatory responsibility for climate risk in the company, which also includes the sort of financial risk that we're exposed to from climate. So I work with risk and other functions in making sure that that's effectively managed. And then I corral and drive the whole sustainability agenda across all topics, whether that's employee whether that's training, development, career, whether it's, you know, power generation, operational activities, or whether it is indeed tier 3 responsibilities in our response to the organizations that we underwrite, or indeed the organizations that we invest in. So we sort of control it all. So if I or rather I sort of sit above it all. If I quickly run you through the framework, just to give you a sense of kind of how we think and organize ourselves, it's in these 3 pots. So we have a customer focused lens to our transition. That's looking at how we are going to grow our sustainable revenue. It's not so much about growing our sustainable revenue, really. It's more about transferring our revenue to sustainable revenue sources, changing our products and propositions to ones that we can account for as sustainable revenue in our internal definition, because there is no external definition, unfortunately. So some stuff we have to make up, some stuff we can align with the development of taxonomy and the development of methodologies for counting such things that are emerging as we speak. So that's looking at how we change our propositions and products and make them more sustainable in the future. The most obvious example is, are we able to ensure you know, the new technologies that customer organizations are utilizing, and will we be ready to do it when they start adopting new technologies, like we're talking about hydrogen at scale? Will we be able to ensure hydrogen? Will we be able to ensure carbon capture and storage facilities? Because Zurich is, although we do have some personal lines business, we are primarily a large-scale commercial insurer in P&C. So it's the VPs and the Shells and people that we're insuring, not so much you, me, and mum. So most of our focus is on that transition that's impacting some of those very large or perhaps medium-sized industries. We also obviously focus on the planet challenge ourselves, our own journey to net zero. We have set reasonably ambitious targets, net zero in our operations by 2030. We are well on the way to that. We will probably exceed that target. If I give you examples of the sorts of things that we do or have already done, our fleet, all company cars will be non-internal combustion engine vehicles by the end of 2024. So our company car scheme, you cannot get a vehicle that's not either hybrid or electric. Our actual essential car user fleet is also incorporated within that. We have mechanisms for employees, for instance, to offset their entire emissions and their emissions from their families. So you can go onto our benefits page, you can select a benefit. It will say, you know, what do you own? Do you own a semi-detached house, a terraced house? You're a family of 4. You know, do you travel frequently overseas? Do you have 2 holidays a year? You know, and it will roughly calculate what your likely carbon emissions are as a family, and you can offset that through one of the benefits they offer. It's surprisingly cheap, and we're encouraging a lot more people to do it. And we've found the employee engagement activities actually incredibly easy to stimulate. That it really is just about kind of organizing and facilitating it. You don't need to do anything. There's a groundswell of community, and certainly from our perspective, employee demand for these sorts of things. So it's relatively easy for us to turn them on. I mentioned that we've also, I'll go on to the other half of the business, if you like, the scope 3. 2050 is the target for net zero in underwriting and net zero in investments. And the reason for that is kind of back to the point that was made at the outset. If we're not there by 2050, we're not there. we're not at or around 1.5 degrees. So all of these targets are in line with Paris Agreement. But the bigger question, the bigger challenge is that requires the real economy to have moved entirely or substantially by 2050, because we insure and we invest in the real economy. You know, we're then back to the question of how do we use our influence to drive and stimulate the behaviors of the organizations that we support with our balance sheets, either through investment or through underwriting coverages. So 2030 for our own operations, well ahead of target. Frankly, it's easy. It's only a matter of relatively low levels of money for a business such as ours, or a bank, or what have you. Relatively low levels of money and some focus, and will. Much harder in terms of scope 3, where we are an influencer. I'll come back onto the flip side of that coin in a minute. And then we have an element of our work that's focused on our people, that's focusing on future-proofing their employment, making sure that there are training pathways for employees in areas where skills might be reducing. This was around anyway as a career sustainability agenda item. It's not a climate item. It's not a response to us saying, oh, our jobs are all going to be different when they're green, because in our industry, they're probably not. It was actually a response to us saying, to tech evolution more than anything, to saying, we're probably going to need more data scientists, more automation experts. We can't get them. They're extremely rare and frankly quite expensive, and they're never in the place we want them. We'll just build our own. And so we've been converting claims analysts into automation people. We've been converting underwriters into data analytics people, and building sort of training pathways for internal employees has been something that's been extremely well received, both by the employees and also, frankly, extremely beneficial to us. So we have quite a broad view of sustainability. It's not just the climate lens. I've then got sort of pages on each that show kind of what we're doing, and I'll get these to you guys so that people can kind of digest them at their leisure or displeasure. But if I focus on the climate one, which is kind of where the conversation's largely been focused before, I think it's important to get this point across that we can only move as fast as the real economy, which is not an excuse. It's just a challenge, and it's just a fact. So how do we make the real economy move as fast as it possibly can is the next question. The vast majority of UK financial institutions are part of an alliance that came out of Glasgow COP called GFANZ. GFANZ is an alliance of financial institutions focused on the net zero journey, and is recognized by government has recognized, I guess, through the UK government, of the power and influence that the financial services sector in the UK could have. And we saw the stat before about, we'd be the 9th biggest country if it was just what we finance and what we support between insurers and banks. So we recognize that the scale of the financial services institutions' power and leverage within the global economy for us here in the UK, and the issue is, how do we use it? There are lots of organizations who would like us to use it very brutally and bluntly, if you like. Withdraw it, take it away from people who are dirty, in inverted commas, which would be one solution, but would be a very, very painful solution. And I think from your perspective, worth thinking about, it would be a very painful solution for the employees of the entities that we'd be withdrawing capacity from. This is true of investment banks investing in those businesses, or us not providing capacity. The minute we stop providing insurance capacity, businesses can't operate and they can't take risks anymore. So they effectively stop. So we do have a lot of leverage. The issue is, how do we use it in a way that is healthy and just, and not so abrupt that it causes downstream unintended or possibly intended consequences, but that they end up hurting in places that we did not intend to hurt. So this is then described as the transition. Those transitions need to be documented by organizations. Everyone's busy producing transition plans this year. We'll publish our first transition plan end of the 3rd quarter, start of the 4th quarter this year. It's well underway. And that is used to describe how we are journeying our business, or mapping a journey for our business towards our net zero ambitions, so that other businesses that seek to trade with us can have a look at that. And that will then be part of intercompany B2B due diligence and trading practices as these things mature. As of next year, everything that we underwrite will be looking for a transition plan from that organization. We'll be looking at that transition plan, so does that make sense? Is it broadly intact? Now, clearly, we haven't seen transition plans yet. We're only just producing the first one ourselves. So it's a maturing conversation. But in the same way that we might get statements of financial stability from organizations, we'll also be receiving statements of climate commitment from those organizations, and we'll be able to challenge and check them. There's metrics in there. There's increasingly metrics that we can utilize to check whether or not somebody's actually meeting those targets. It is troublesome. I mean, you know, one of the questions I think I was asked to touch on was what's hard. That the hard stuff is not getting momentum. The hard stuff is being precise, because there isn't the precision and accuracy of data. There isn't an even supply of data, not just across not across industries, but certainly not across parts of the world where, you know, other parts of the world just, this is not their primary focus. Feeding families is people's primary focus in other places. And so, you know, and it's extremely hard to change that. So, you know, there's an inequality of focus, there's an inequality of data, and that is probably the biggest issue that we are likely to face. Continued, consistent, controlled regulation will be part of the solution and is forming part of the solution. We report under TCFD, so a whole lot of climate and carbon reporting that goes alongside our financial reporting, and all financial services institutions in the UK will be subject to that if they're regulated by the PRA. So, you know, there's an increasing amount of regulation coming from the sector, coming from the government. The transition plan requirement comes from the HMRC, for instance. So different bodies are applying pressure to certainly to financial services and also to other industries to increase the level of coherent conversation that we can collectively have with each other around the impact that we're having on climate. And, you know, and I think you see a pretty strong commitment from financial services broadly to kind of face into this role that we recognize that we have as an influential player and as an influencer on other industries. There are some downsides, there are some areas where we don't have the influence that people might anticipate, or we haven't historically, or because we've never really used it for that purpose. Ours is an intermediated business. We don't actually interact directly with customers for the most part. The UK insurance market operates through distribution partnerships, both in the corporate space and in the personal line space. Most people don't buy their insurance off an insurance company, and they actually buy it off Compare the Market or someone in a domestic context. And that's very similar in a corporate context. It's bought through brokers. So, you know, getting to customers is actually something that's harder to do than you might actually think. And there's brokers who are very protective of their relationships with their customers, and they particularly want you to have more interaction than they can control. However, on topics like climate, those barriers are just sort of falling away, because the organizations themselves understand they need a climate conversation with insurers direct, particularly at the larger end. And you know, where they're coming in and saying, look, I need you to help me with my transition plan. It's going to be hard for me if I'm a steel organization or a heavy industry. It's going to be hard for me to make this journey. I can't have you leaving me high and dry on these risks because you're desperate to insure only these ones. And that's, you know, we had a bit of a conversation to break about a just transition. For us, that's a very core element of a just transition. It's not reasonable for me to say, well, I don't want to insure your lorry fleet, but I'll do your cars because you converted them to electric. Because that's me picking and choosing what I want to insure, rather than saying to that customer, let me see your transition plan holistically. What are you doing? What are the easy things? Are you making the kind of pace of progress on those? How are you working and chipping away at the harder to do things? Is that reasonable in the round? Can we check and monitor it going forward? If we can, I can support that. If we can't, I'm going to challenge it some more until I can support it. So it's that sort of dialogue that we'll be having with organizations to make sure that we can have something that is indeed just.
Thank you, John. The idea of the transition plan I find fascinating, and how that's going to be implemented in terms of decisions that Zurich may. I mean, you know, is this more a like I guess a gender pay gap thing, where it's just basically putting it out there to say if it's not good enough, then your reputation there is affected, or is the plan to say no, actually, if by this date or whatever, we will take a hard line and not insure part of
It's the latter. So there's already things that we won't insure. And we drew some red lines a few years back on certain topics, mainly in sort of new oil and gas, specific elements of the oil and gas industry primarily. But that said, you know, I can't, and this is where organizations like ourselves or banks or building societies can get themselves into troubled spots. I can't talk about, you know, we've completely eradicated single-use plastic and all of our food and catering is locally sourced and it's all wonderful and cuddly and all my employees can offset their entire family's emissions and isn't it great? And then someone will turn around and say, yes, but you're the largest single UK insurer for the oil and gas industry. Like, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention that. So, you know, and that's what people talk about when they're talking about greenwashing. They're saying, well, I'm worried about plastic spoons, but I'm polluting the planet over here with my other hand and just choosing not to talk about it. And so greenwashing isn't necessarily, for us, the risk is not necessarily that we try and deceive actively. It's that we only find ourselves talking about the things we want to talk about, and we don't talk about the reality of our business and the proportion of it that comes from or delivers greenhouse gas emissions through the businesses that we support.
I was thinking of it, Nick, from another point of view of, hey, senior underwriter, have a look at this transition plan and tell me, is it the one, is it the standard we're working towards? So a lot of work's got to be done to say, what this transition plan looks like.
Yeah.
And as you say, John, when you're looking at a global interpretation, I mean, it's hard enough in this country to define what reusable is or even recycle. We can't agree. How do you do that with India, China, and other countries for a transition plan that's written and judged in the UK? Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be extremely difficult. It'll be relatively easy for us to make a judgment, albeit my underwriters don't know what a transition plan looks like right now.
Yeah.
So we're educating them on the conversation. We participate in something called the Transition Plan Task Force, where a load of industries are talking about what are these things and how are they going to look. And it's an evolution. Year one is not the answer, but it's really, really important to get year one out because we only have year two after year one. It'll be relatively easy for me to do it for a hairdressing salon or a chip shop or even a haulage firm from Middlesbrough or something. You know, we'll be able to look at UK businesses of various sizes, all the way up to large, to large UK businesses through the lens of a UK transition plan. The minute we go to a global organisation where we don't have them, right? We don't have that. There's no requirement for them to produce one from anybody. So, you know, if I'm going to a large UK company, I can expect a UK transition plan. If they're the group entity, then I can probably expect them to have had a go at a global version. They don't actually have to. They only have to do one for the UK entities. But for instance, Zurich Group doesn't have to do one, but it is. Not quite sure what it's going to say. I'm working very closely with them at the moment because I think ours will be the template for the groups. But you know, where we're talking to multinational organisations, which is a pretty big chunk of our customer base, and because of London's leading role in global insurance, a lot of those companies come to London to place. You know, we end up looking at risks that are in Latin America and that are in Australasia, that are in Asia, as part of a contract that we have with them globally. So it will be a challenge, but the important thing is that we kind of get stuck into it, work out what it is that we can do, we can know, where it is that we don't have information, we don't have visibility, and then start working out what we do about it.
Great, thank you. And I mean, I guess for others in the room as well, I think it would be really interesting to see how transparent with the unions and staff associations, other companies in the sector will be, or just actually generally employers across the whole country, when it comes to these transition plans and how much influence we could potentially have. So yeah, another challenge for everyone. Brilliant, thank you very much. Right, we have we're going to finish with Claire Trotman, who has been the Marine Conservation Society has already been mentioned, as Matt has been working with them previously, and we have Claire Trotman with us today, who is, am I right, Beachwatch Officer at the Marine Conservation Society?
Hi everyone, yes, that's right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thumbs up is absolutely fine, brilliant. Okay, I'm going to try to present in Teams. If it all goes horribly wrong, I apologise. Just bear with me a second. See if it's preparing my slides.
Yeah, brilliant.
Great.
Okay.
Is that large for everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is, yes.
brilliant. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm from the Marine Conservation Society and I'm here to talk to you about our Beachwatch programme and ways that you can get involved in sustainable activities with us. So thank you very much, Matt, for inviting me to the session today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who the Marine Conservation Society are in case you haven't heard of us, what our Beachwatch programme does, the importance of beach cleaning and collecting litter data, what we do with that information that we gather, and importantly, of course, how you can get involved as an organisation, as individuals, as part of a volunteer day, or even with your friends and family. So the Marine Conservation Society are a UK-based charity that aims to protect the future of our oceans around the UK and in the UK overseas territory. We've got around 100 staff, but for every one staff member we have about 10 volunteers. So we're sort of really volunteer powered, to be honest. We do our work, we can work at any point on 3 core programs. So our Ocean Recovery Programme is where we campaign for more marine reserves around the UK and UK overseas territories and better protection within those reserves from damaging activities. We also work on seeking a healthier ocean around the UK. So that's looking at making sure that fish stocks are fished at sustainable levels, should you choose to eat them. And also we produce things such as the Good Fish Guide, and I'll come on to talk about that in a moment. And where I fit in is our Cleaner Ocean work, which is really about trying to prevent litter from entering our seas where it can cause a lot of damage, including chemical pollution as well. We work in 3 ways. So we have an advocacy and policy team in all 4 devolved nations of the UK. So we engage with parliamentarians to try to get laws changed. We also engage with businesses and also civil servants as well to try to steer policy in the right direction, whether it's working on single-use plastics or whether it's working on something like marine conservation zones. We also have an active education and youth team that will go out into schools and talk to children about why the oceans that surround them in the UK are so important and what they can do to protect them. And we lead a lot of practical conservation work too. So that's anything from Beachwatch, our citizen science project, to actually getting things like EU funding to improve natural habitats within marine reserves as well. And just to say, before I go on to talk about Beachwatch itself, we do actually produce something called the Good Fish Guide, which you might find helpful if you eat fish. It's available on our website, but it's also a downloadable web link that you can download that then acts as an app on your phone. So if you go to your local supermarket or fish and chip shop and want to know what the most sustainable choice of fish is for you to eat, you can type in that fish species and it'll come up with a rating and a bit of an explanation as to whether it's a fish species that you want to avoid or whether it's safe to eat. So you can do that, and it's free of charge as well. That gets updated twice a year, in line with lots of sustainability criteria, which we are constantly monitoring for each fishery. So I sit in our Beachwatch team, which is part of our Clean Seas programme. And our goal for 2023 for Cleaner Oceans is that we want to see ocean pollution levels showing a clear downward trend. Now that seems very broad, but that's really because we don't know yet the full extent of the impact that pollution is having on our oceans, but we do have data. So our data at the moment is telling us that for every metre that you step on a beach, you're likely to find 3 items of litter. And that's from all the survey information that we're getting back from volunteers. So we need to see that drastically reduced if we're really going to have an impact, a positive impact on pollution entering our seas. Probably teaching people to suck eggs now, but why is marine litter particularly dangerous? Well, larger litter items such as these like nylon monofilament fishing rope can get entangled in marine mammals and fish species. It can cause nasty cuts on the skin, which then lead to bacterial infections. And worst case scenario, it can actually lead to suffocation as well. The top right there, that's actually angling line. We know it's a big problem on our beaches at the moment. It often gets washed in, or it can be left on a beach. And you know, there's a lot of cause for concern there. But a more hidden threat is what happens to plastic when it breaks down in the environment. So by the time it actually gets to a beach, say for instance, if it started as litter in land, it might just be in very, very small pieces of plastic or polystyrene. The reason that's so dangerous is because particularly things like marine birds can eat it, mistaking it perhaps for a fish species, and there it enters its gut and they can't digest it properly. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more marine mammals and birds now. You might have seen Blue Planet 2 with the fulmar and the stomach just full of plastic. Once that happens, the animal's no longer able to feed and digest food, and then it ultimately dies of starvation. So we want to make sure that that litter does not enter the ocean in under any circumstances. And that's really where our Beachwatch work comes in. We're more than just a beach cleaning programme. So it's actually a citizen science programme where we get as many volunteers out onto the coast as possible throughout the year, cleaning beaches, but also surveying the litter that they find. The litter that we've been surveying using a recording form has taken place since 1994. So next year will be 30 years of collecting the survey data. And it allows us to understand what types of litter are increasing and what types of litter are decreasing. It then means that we can go to decision makers, including government, ministers, parliamentarians, and say, you know, we need to cut down on the amount of single-use plastic we're using, for instance, or plastic carrier bags. And we have a range of campaigns that we're running at any one time. And just to say as well, we do have a flagship event every September, which is called the Great British Beach Clean. Some of you may have heard of it. It's UK wide, and that's really where every September for 10 days, we get as many volunteers out onto our beaches as possible, cleaning up litter and surveying for us. We then report on those surveys afterwards. So last year, over the course of 2022, we were able to support over 13,000 volunteers to get out and to clean beaches. And between them, they submitted over 1,000 litter surveys for us. And why do we ask volunteers to survey this litter data? So I've just touched on this, but basically it allows us to not just get all that harmful litter off the beach and away from the ocean and away from people and children and dogs as well, but it also allows us to identify the origins of those litter items. So is it shipping litter that we're finding? Is it fishing litter that we're finding? Is it publicly dropped litter that we're finding? It's usually a mixture of all of these things, but with the survey data that we get back, we're able to categorically say we know that, for instance, most of the litter that we find is drop litter from the public, but we also find a lot of fishing litter too. The other thing that we're allowed to understand from the survey information we get back is litter types too. So about 80% of the litter that we find is plastic or polystyrene in origin. We find a lot of caps and lids, packets, so sweet wrappers, lolly wrappers, but we also find a lot of sewage related litter as well, such as wet wipes. And I'll come on to mention that in a little bit more detail in a moment. How do we survey? So I won't dwell on this for too long, but in case anybody was interested, we ask our volunteers when they're running a beach clean to not just clean the beach, but also to mark out a 100-metre stretch with perhaps, 2 gardening poles or something similar, or some rocks. And then they survey everything they find within that 100-metre stretch, from the back of the beach down to the strand line being where you tend to get all your seaweed and bits of beach debris sort of wrapped up together. That's the stretch that we're after really in terms of the survey. But then of course volunteers can then go on to clean the rest of the beach as well. It means that we can standardise our survey data and compare what's happening between beaches and also between UK countries as well. So what is the data that we're asking volunteers to collect actually telling us? So we'll quickly look at last year's survey submissions. So this is Scotland for 2022. So we had over 3,000 volunteers take part in beach cleaning for us. And one of the take-home messages that we're campaigning on at the moment is that unfortunately our volunteers in 2022 in Scotland found over 30,000 wet wipes on the beaches that they surveyed. So we think this is a particular problem to the Central Belt area of Scotland. So areas where you have big kind of a lot of urbanisation. So Edinburgh, Glasgow, for instance, and you've got those big estuaries that then enter into the sea. And we think really what's happened is there's a lot of combined sewage outfalls in those areas that have allowed raw sewage to enter the estuaries and then enter the sea. And unfortunately, that comes with a lot of sanitary items. So wet wipes is probably the nicest thing you're going to find on a beach from sanitary. There's a lot of nasty things we also find. So yeah, there's a lot of campaign work that we're doing with Scottish Water and Scottish Government to try and reduce the amount of raw sewage entering our seas in those locations. In England in 2022, we had over 8,000 volunteers take part in beach cleans for us. And the big message there really was that nearly all, so 95%, nearly all of our beaches had some sort of drink or drinks container related litter items on it. So whether that's caps and lids, the tether bits that come with caps and lids, the actual bottles themselves and cans. And that's the reason why we're calling for a deposit return system for single-use drinks containers to be introduced in England and around the UK, because the levels of drink-related litter items is just really unacceptable on beaches at the moment. And in Wales, interestingly, and it is a particular problem with us, and we're not quite sure why, but we found our volunteers, found nearly 3,000 cigarette butts. The reason why cigarettes are so dangerous on beaches is because they can still contain toxins, and often they're made of synthetic plastic fibres as well. So people, I think they're often sort of natural fibre, but they're not, and they will remain on beaches for a long, long time. Not only are they unsightly, but they can also be dangerous if they're ingested by animals. So we're working with Ash Cymru to try to understand this problem a little bit more and do some public awareness campaigns around not treating beaches as an ashtray, to be fair. So what do we do with our results? So we produce an annual report called State of Our Beaches, and that's something that's actually downloadable as a PDF on our website. It opens out into a nice poster that can be then put up around offices and stuff. And if anybody wants any copies of this, I'm happy to send those out to people. We also submit our data to OSPAR and to the Ocean Conservancy. So these are international organisations that want to know what's happening globally with regard to the beach litter. And we submit data to DEFRA as well. And then the rest of the time, we use it for public awareness campaigns and when we're campaigning for new laws on things like single-use plastic. So these are some of the things that we've been doing already. So a couple of years ago, we worked with businesses to try to get them to put better labelling on their wet wipes as to whether they're fine to flush or not, so that people weren't confused about what to do in these situations. We also gave evidence to get cotton buds banned that were made of plastic in the UK as well, and we've been campaigning hard, like I said before, for deposit return systems around Scotland and the rest of the UK. Our evidence was also used to inform the plastic carrier bag charges that came into effect about 10 years ago. And we can actually say with our data now that we're finding 60% less plastic carrier bags on our beaches since the 5p and 10p single-use plastic carrier bag charges were introduced that time ago. So it shows that policy does work once it's implemented. Like I mentioned just now, we're also doing a lot of work with water companies to try to get them to reduce the amount of raw sewage that are entering our estuaries and coastal environments, because unfortunately a lot of that still contains sewage related nasties that we're finding on our beaches. And I would say, I'm sure everybody knows on this call, but please don't flush anything other than the 3 P's down the toilet. That's pee, poo and paper. This is our public awareness campaign, which we ran recently. This was a giant wet white monster that we took on a roadshow around the coast of the UK, just to chat to people really about what they should and shouldn't be flushing down the toilet. So finally, just to come on to the most important thing, how you can get involved. So there's many ways to get involved in beach cleaning if that's something you're interested in. So it's something that we encourage people to do as a volunteer day, a team building day, or do it individually with friends and family, or even go the next step and become a long-standing volunteer for us. So first and foremost, if you just want to find out whether a beach clean is happening in your area, you can go to mcsuk.org/beachwatch, and it'll then let you search for a location, the extent in which you're willing to travel, and it'll tell you whether one's happening or not. If there isn't one happening in your area, another thing that you can do is actually organise your own. That's really where my role comes in. I'm here to support volunteers to set up their own cleans around the UK. So we have guides and resources, including things like public liability insurance that will cover you for your clean. We have how-to videos that we produced last year, which have like little bite-sized snippets on what to do before the day, on the day, and then how to submit your survey data. But just to say as well, now that we're moving into the sort of spring, summer, we also hold monthly free webinar training, which are about an hour long. So if you're interested in maybe holding a clean for your colleagues or for your friends and family, do feel free to come to one of these because they're free of charge, and you can find out a lot more about how to hold one. What I'll do is I can put the link into the chat if that's helpful to people as well about signing up to those webinars. The other ways you can get involved in beach cleans is that we do also run corporate beach clean, team beach clean events, which can be run as volunteer and team building days. So we'll do a big beach clean in the morning, and then we'll do team building activities in the afternoon. Now these do come at a cost because it's where you would have a staff member present and will be sort of running the day for you as kind of like a corporate day. So do feel free to find out more about those as well. And there are other ways you can support our work in MCS. We have an individual membership offer, as well as opportunities to become corporate sponsors and members. So check out our website if you're interested in supporting the work that we do. And just to say as well that the Great British Beach Clean is taking place again this year between the 15th and the 24th of September. And we encourage you, if you're interested, to get involved over that 10-day period where we'll be doing a lot of promotion to get volunteers up and running with their cleans and getting that survey data back. You can find out more about anything I've just mentioned by contacting us on beachwatch@mcsuk.org. And that kind of brings me to the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has, and I will stop sharing my screen at this point as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Claire. It was really interesting. And I will add that I will put some links on our website as well about about that, and people can find it there. And I think with regards to the Great British Beach Clean, we could advertise that, towards the time as well. I guess just one thing from me, because I know that from experience in this industry, there are a lot of volunteer days that happen. It's part of people's role within the sector. Do you have partnerships as such with companies to promote what you do and ask for volunteers around those times?
Yeah, we do. And if you're interested, we're absolutely happy to include you in those conversations, because what we tend to do is we'll have quarterly e-newsletters that come out to volunteer organisers to tell them about kind of any changes to our guides and resources, and good dates that are coming up that you might be interested in running a beach clean, for instance, World Oceans Day, or the coronation events that are coming up soon. But we also, as well, I get in touch with all partners around this time, actually, just to let them know of the new dates for Great British Beach Clean. They tend to be honest, they tend to be the same week, the same 10 days every year, but it's just to give them an update. And if they want to, refresh their knowledge by attending our webinars or anything like that. So yeah, we'd be happy to add you to those lists.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I mean, I think it's something that I hopefully in the union sphere that the green reps actually are taking much more responsibility in pushing these sorts of charitable events and I think linking the two, the organisation and something like your organisation would be I would see in the long term as part of their role potentially. So
one of the things, because we have a relationship with MCS, and one of the things that's quite useful for businesses is to find a connect point, because there's lots of ways, there's lots of sustainable activities that organizations getting involved with. But it's quite useful to find one that connects. So we have a couple of things going with MCS. One is an escape of water linked activity, where when we get an escape of water claim, which is quite a common peril for an insurance company, we plant a metre of seagrass with MCS as part of their coastal restoration program. We have a team, we have a boat and pleasure craft insurance company based in Brighton, Navigators in General. Navigators in General doing a beach clean, presumably Claire with your team somewhere, because for them, kind of the whole coastal environment is a big, has a direct association with their business, with their customers, etc. So it's not only something that they would want to do, it's also something that kind of they can then talk to their customers about, and it connects their customers to it, potentially gets more interest. So it's useful for businesses to kind of find ways to have other more logical connections with some of these activities, because it helps build interest, it helps build connection and sustainability of the relationship as well, which is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of organisations who are involved in local communities, if you're on the coast, then obviously it makes sense, doesn't it? So it's definitely something to look at. And I would encourage everyone as well to go back to your organisations, and if you haven't got green reps, you haven't got what was the word that was used by earlier on, champions or something in that organisation. Then that's. I mean, I think it's been clear today. If your organisation is not willing to have that conversation, then something's not right, I think. So yeah, definitely have those. Anything else?
I mean, there's various technical areas I'm going to go, but actually with the time left, this one's for each speaker. And Claire, I'm going to start with you. So it's two parts.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
No problem.
The first one is I'm giving you the magic wand. So is there one thing you'd love to see change if you could wave that magic wand? But I also want you, if you can, to give us something positive. It might go back to your plastic bags, and I wrote down that 60%, because that is a pretty great thing in those years.
Yeah.
But have you got another great one, another good thing that's changing? Because otherwise all my questions focus on people's behaviour and just feel like quite a weight. So something to lift us as well.
Yeah. No problem. Yeah, well, it was really interesting actually to hear Matt talking about all the sustainability initiatives that they're looking into already and trying to implement. And I just think that's really positive, because that's where it starts, really. We can campaign to government and we can campaign to our parliamentarians and that kind of thing, but actually it's really day-to-day businesses that are making those changes. And that, to be honest, a lot of the time businesses tend to be ahead of the curve anyway. The legislation sometimes, not always, but sometimes comes after. So I think it's brilliant to see some of those changes already being enacted. It's great that there is more legislation that's being introduced at the moment, I think around all UK nations, with regards to single-use items such as takeaway fast food not being polystyrene anymore, and banned some of those sort of single-use items that we can live without, like cutlery and all that kind of stuff. But I think I think that's really where I want to see the biggest changes, and it sounds like some of it's already happening. But and I think that's where you're absolutely right. The data is so important, because it doesn't just help us to campaign for change, but it also shows us whether the change has worked. So yeah, sorry, I'm not sure I've answered that question properly, but I think we have to live with hope, because if we don't, then what's the point? So yeah.
And the magic wand bit, which was your magic wand moment? What would you love to just, for everyone who's on this call, to do differently in the future, and everyone they know?
I think the whole notion around, I know we used to talk a lot about reduce, reuse, recycle, but I think we need to move now, because at the point where we're at in society, to refuse, reuse, reduce, recycle. So do we need this packaging? Do we need, when we're thinking about procurement, do we need these things? Can we look up, can we go with a supplier that doesn't use as much packaging? That's really my magic one, would be the refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, I think.
Thank you, Claire. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's when you notice certain things in supermarket and that they've got packaging on, and they don't have to. I'm thinking it's cauliflower, basically, things like that.
Can I go to Anna?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, Anna's not.
All
right. Can we go to John next?
Yes.
Same questions.
Yeah, I mean, I would really support Anna's. Can we just not demand it in the first place? And actually, you get into complex versions of that. I don't drive. I get asked a lot, what electric car do I drive? And I don't, because I haven't changed my car, because I don't need a new car. And the first question you need to ask yourself is, do we need it? And unfortunately, we got here because apparently we all needed so much, and we still need things all the time. We might not even need the cauliflower, let alone the packaging. Particularly not if it rots in our fridge. But I guess, if given my role slightly different to Claire's, I would be waving a wand to stop all the nonsense about, because we can't define it, or because we can't count it, or because there's not a methodology for something, we don't do anything. We just talk about it for another year. Kind of, I think back to a point that's been made earlier about, us sort of watching problems rather than fixing problems. There's lots of opportunities, and there seems to be a lot of time taken to define and resolve and meet and have quangos and have further sessions to define what we defined last time and all the rest of it. And I think if we cut that out, that stuff will arrive through action. It will have to come through necessity. So that would be kind of my magic wand. And I guess on the positive side, we're decarbonizing the globe, which is a massive, massive opportunity. So it's a business opportunity as well as an opportunity for everybody to kind of undo a lot of what we spent the last 150 years doing. But there should be huge, opportunities that are created in new industries, different industries, as they get reshaped, from your guys' perspective, new jobs, new different career paths in places where perhaps there weren't the kind of sustainability or longevity of careers that were once available. There's a real opportunity to re-inject, and I think this is the UK's big focus. UK PLC can be a real beneficiary of this global change if we get our response to it right.
Okay, great, thank you, John. And when you send through the slides, please send a bit more information about the employees being able to offset through the flexibility scheme, because I think that will get some interest elsewhere as well. Matt, over to you. Wand,
I think from talks within Nationwide, I know one of the biggest challenges within Nationwide is around their mortgage book. So I think if I were looking to wave a magic wand, it would be around kind of new house building. I think the fact that we're still currently building houses, right now, that we know aren't going to be sufficient for where we need to get to only a matter of years down the line is madness to me. So kind of the standards around new house building in terms of their kind of insulation and energy efficiency, I think is something that, you know, if we could address anything, it would be, I think it would be that. And I think in terms of, you know, moving to the positive, I think, you know, today has been extremely positive, and I think it's, you know, as I said, it's been a relatively short journey over the last 12 months, but kind of coming to that realization that, you know, financial services, although on the face of it doesn't necessarily appear like to be a big producer in emissions, it's coming to the understanding that actually it does have a part to play, and as John's reference, you know, does have a lot of influence in other sections as well. I think it's a really positive thing.
Lovely.
I'll be fairly quick. I think for me it's twofold. Magic wand would be affordability. I think there's a certain element of, as much as we want to do it, we're in a cost of living crisis, and actually being sustainable and being green can be more expensive than it is to be not. And for a lot of people, that's a big sort of discussion point for them, and can they afford to do it, and is the easier option just to carry on doing what we've always done because it happens to be cheaper, and it goes across all sorts of areas. So for me, magic one would be probably make it a bit more affordable for people. I don't know, but, and I think from a positive perspective, the fact that, and I don't want to end up in discrimination points, but sometimes the youth of today going into newer jobs, one of the aspects they're looking at is they want them to be green, and so that, and the organisations they go into, and that's a big criteria for them, and they're doing that naturally, whereas we're having to change an older mindset and people are already doing it. So for me, that's a positive that all those people that are coming through, it's inherent in them to be thinking about those things as they move forward.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you to everyone, John, Matt, Caroline, Kevin, Claire, and to Anna who spoke. Anyone who submitted questions. Hopefully, it's given you, empowered you to go away and start conversations with your own employers as well. We'll get this all the slides and the video up on the website as soon as possible. And so, thank you very much, and thank you for bearing with us at the start. But it was good to see you all. I hope to see you at the next one. Thank you very much.
Glad. A lot of love coming through on the chat.